Chapter 30. Irma's case had gone to trial because she had maintained her innocence. 2 months after her father's death, Fleur had been called to the witness stand, where she had answered all the questions from the prosecuting barrister with care and precision, as he masterfully guided her through her memories of Irma's behaviour and the questions of Henry's death. And when the defending barrister took to his feet with an expression of disdain that was meant to throw her off balance, Fleur hadn't reacted to his withering stare or the protracted silence. As he made a theatrical tour of the space before her, she forced herself to regard Irma and was deeply surprised to find a sense of pity that someone would go to such lengths for money. It remained perplexing to Fleur because Irma had wanted for nothing as an Appleby, and Henry was far from an ogre as a husband. It was only during trial that Fleur had learned about Irma's family, as her backstory began to take shape for the judge and jury. She birthed twins at her teenage years, a boy and a girl, now nearly 40. The son disabled with a twisted leg. They were both in the courtroom daily, and Fleur found it her greatest challenge to face them from the witness stand and speak out against their mother. She had been warned by the prosecutor not to elaborate when responding, or the defence would find ways to constantly interject or ridicule her. The prosecuting counsel, in his formidable wig and robe, had impressed his guidance upon her. Answer only what they ask. Be concise but explicit in your answers, and take your time to think it before you respond. It's your right to be careful. The advice, and indeed warning, had burned in her mind as the man defending Irma began his interrogation, doing his utmost to corner Fleur into yes or no answers that worked against her testimony. She calculated soon enough that her intention was to make her claim against Irma feel circumstantial, unable to be proven without doubt. Even Fleur could sense that her claim was coming across as simply her word against her stepmother's. But she had her ace card, which she now knew her beloved Tom had brought into play. The powerful admission by the father and son coffin makers, which had added all the weight for the case against Irma, could not be doubted. Burke Coughlin even produced a damning note written by Irma, instructing him to buy the oysters she would leave to decay so she wouldn't be associated with their purchase. Fleur had looked down upon this piece of irrefutable evidence had been produced, knowing it was proverbial nail in the coffin for Irma. She had proven to be as capable an actress in court fighting for her life as she had been in Appleby High, where she had outmaneuvered Fleur. Nevertheless, even Irma couldn't wriggle out of the statement made by the Coughlins under an oath, which corroborated all of Fleur's claim. And the more the barrister delved into Irma's life, the more she seemed to damn herself as a person prepared to risk everything for self-interest, or at least in the interest of children she seemed to truly adore. The treachery against Fleur and Tom was not presented. Considered irrelevant to the main thread of the case, it wounded Fleur privately to think that the great love of her life and the betrayal that had taken him from her considered immaterial. It felt like her whole life had been rent twice over by Irma. Perhaps the biggest surprise of all was watching Irma weep when she had to take the stand and talk about her children. Fleur had spent too long in Irma's company not to have developed a keen sense for her stepmother's guile, but in this instance the sound of her sobs seemed genuine. Fleur hadn't known until that moment that Irma had the capacity to love, or that she possessed a single note of authentic tenderness within. This epiphany had begun as a small tangle of uncertainty in Fleur's gut that over the course of the trial and in the days leading up to the sentencing grew bigger until it squirmed uncomfortably in her belly. Fleur knew what her conscience was demanding. She looked around the courtroom and despaired from the accusations to the onlookers salivating over the details of greed, jealousy, and murder. It was everything her father would squirm away from, and she could feel its stain spreading over her as she tried to keep her expression even and her posture straight when it wanted to curve under the weight of the trial. She wished she could share with Tom that Irma's guilt felt like lead weight. She felt like yelling at the judge, "This shouldn't be my burden," and still it is. All she wanted when the trial was over was to walk out into the sunshine and Tom's strong, safe arms, and not have to feel any of the trial's guilt follow her. But it was gone, and the heaviness of Irma's trial was pressing on her shoulders. On the day of the sentencing hearing, when the newspapers were clamouring to report on the decision, anticipating that it would be a death sentence, Fleur had to be heard. Fleur had asked to be heard. She sat quietly looking down at the lap as the judge opened the session. Various people spoke about the guilty verdict that had inevitably been announced at the end of the trial, and then Irma's defense counsel had his chance to argue for a lenient sentence, taking into full account of her background and lack of prior involvement in anything remotely close to murder. The prosecution had identical opportunity and naturally pressed for Irma to face hanging, irrespective of her sad background, based purely on the gravity of her crime against an innocent good man of South Australia, so well regarded in his community. The demand chilled Fleur. All the anger and despair that had built over the years of living alongside this horrible woman since childhood, culminating in the day of Irma's arrest, seemed to flee in that moment as the prosecution made its advice known. The barrister pressed on the fact that the jury had accepted Irma's premeditated actions in the murder of Henry, that she had set about causing death using 2 forms of poison over the course of a protracted period. Fleur's mind raced as Irma's children were allowed to speak. She couldn't bear to listen. Instead, she withdrew into her thoughts. I can't bring Dad back, she told herself repeatedly, the truth of it knocking about in her mind like a fly banging against a window pane, and a second urgent fly banging against the same pane. Irma's death achieves nothing. As Irma's daughters finished giving an impassioned plea for her mother's life, the judge finally turned to Fleur. I believe Miss Appleby would like to address the court. Everyone shifted in their seats. It seemed obvious to all that the Fleur was going to make it an equally impassioned plea for the judge to use the full weight of his powers against Irma for the murder of her father. She had planned to read her statement, but instead, as she folded up the page upon which she scrawled her thoughts, slipped into the pocket of her summer jacket. Fleur drew in a deep, inaudible breath, reminding herself that nothing in her life would be as important as what she did in this moment. She swallowed, lifted her chin, and regarded Irma's children before she finally let her gaze land on Irma, who, to her credit, met Fleur's eyes with scorching defiance. Thank you for this opportunity, Fleur began. I wish to express my keen desire for this court to show mercy, and I wish to argue strongly for leniency to be shown to Irma Appleby. She paused for the inevitable gasp, which came as a collective noise. Pandemonium erupted as court reporters rushed to scribble down her exact words, and everyone began talking at once. The judge quickly regained order of his court with a couple of deafening bangs of his gavel. Fleur hadn't taken her eyes off Irma, who blinked in clear surprise. She continued, having listened to all that has shaped my stepmother's life, I feel it would be a travesty to punish a woman whose childhood began in poverty, in fear, in hunger, and in abuse. I was an orphan, but I became one of the luckiest to ever live. I have known only love, laughter, and plenty of my life from May and Henry Appleby, who adopted me. They knew how to provide all that a child needs to thrive, and if my mother had not died so young, the three of us would be living in harmony and happiness. I've learned over the course of the trial that Irma was attacked as a 13-year-old, still a child, 13 and pregnant, and it's horrific for any of us to imagine, and the nuns who were supposed to care for her blamed her instead. They took away the children she carried in the all too young body, but she found them again years later, and I have only respect and indeed admiration for her courage. Fleur had looked away as she spoke to be sure the whole court was hanging on her statement, but now she looked back at Irma, who appeared shaken, tears watering in her eyes. It was a rare moment of genuine respect between Fleur and Irma. Fleur swallowed again, emboldened by Irma's reaction, then continued, I mean, can you imagine yourself as an abandoned child who feels ignored and unloved, and is then abused by a stranger, an adult with all the power, and then you are blamed for the horrific accident? But the pain didn't stop there. At 13, when most of us were playing in gardens or building sandcastles at the beach, she was carrying twins from the rapist, along with all the guilt and blame. These are defining years for a girl, and they shaped her view of the world in a way few of us can probably understand. Fleur took a breath. I would like to say to the court that if any of us had been treated in this manner, then most of us were either going to die, or if we were somehow to survive, develop a selfish attitude just to survive, as Irma chose to do. For all my loss and heartache at how my father passed away, I'm convinced now that Irma had never known any love from anyone. I think my father was the first man to show any tenderness or respect towards her, and of course she clung to that. But I suspect she never trusted it. Certainly didn't trust me, the indulged, precocious child growing up in a midst with all the opportunity in the world, when her own children had so little as they battled into adulthood, separated into various foster homes. I feel ashamed that I didn't know about my stepbrother and stepsister. I wish I had, because I would have welcomed them into our home. Irma broke into audible sobs at Fleur's admission, and beneath those sobs, all in the court could hear her repeating, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Fleur took another deep breath, moved by Irma's apology. "My father was dying. I cannot deny that. Irma made it happen sooner than was necessary, and while she has no business playing executioner in her own interest, I think we can all see that she wanted to give her children some hope, a chance at a better life. I might make it my business to help in that regard with my brother and sister." Irma's jobs intensified. "Judge, I make this plea for leniency because Irma never stood much of a chance. Her life was molded in such a way that she would never trust, never accept affection, and she became entirely self-centered, losing sight of right and wrong. I cannot ask the court to forgive her, but I am asking it to help her to atone for it. If I can find mercy, the person who has lost the most to Irma, including..." She couldn't finish the sentence, preferring to keep Tom out of this dark place. Instead, she cleared her throat. "I'm pleading with the people of South Australia to do the same. Show mercy. Irma will likely spend her remaining years behind bars. Perhaps if we show her mercy, then she might just be able to change the trajectory of some of the younger offenders in prison alongside her. I suspect Irma will take on that role. It will give her purpose for the first time in her legal life, and in my view, it turns something that was once bad into something that can work for good. I think that's what punishment for crime is about. I don't see how my stepmother losing her life achieves anything for anyone who has suffered from her crime, certainly not my family." Fleur paused to look around at those in attendance and the judge. "I want no vengeance. I simply want peace of mind. If we all take a more gentle approach to the welfare of those around us, the world will be a better place. So I'm pleading with the court to spare Irma Appleby's life." She finished, breathing hard. The judge took a long, slow breath, staring at her over the rim of the glasses. "Thank you for your honest and heartfelt thoughts, Miss Appleby. I shall give due consideration to this." Back in the courtroom 1 week later, Irma Appleby was sentenced to life in prison, and a look was exchanged between the two Appleby women that anyone in the courtroom might have understood as a peace being made. While Irma was taken down in handcuffs, whispering whatever she could to her weeping daughter and her son, who wore a stoic expression, Fleur left the courtroom, scurrying down the steps into the soft sunshine of an Adelaide winter. She breathed out a relief. She knew both her parents would be proud of her, and that was enough. Something about the dry warmth as she took a deep breath spoke of the place where the man she loved had likely returned to a desert winter. While she had been pouring out her thoughts to the court, her heart had poured something into her mind. Find him, make him understand it was a lie. Chapter 31, July 1935. It had been 9 weeks since Fleur had spent a night in the arms of Tom, since he'd been told a terrible lie and he'd left her. They'd been in love and committed to one another just 9 hours before he disappeared. 9 weeks since her father had died, less than 9 months before Tom believed she would be giving birth to Jimmy Coglin's baby. 9 days since Irma's sentencing hearing, life imprisonment. It was a win. The judge could have demanded that Irma give her life for her wicked and murderous deeds, but the sentence had been commuted, and a glance of thanks had been cut Fleur's way, not just from Irma Appleby, but from her 2 children, who Fleur came to think of as family. She had not acted on her resolve to formalize their relationship, but she would. But first there was something far more important to be done. She felt queasy this morning, nerves perhaps, or the strain of the previous dramatic weeks. Her body was asking her to give it some time, but she didn't have time. She had to find Tom, had to give her chance to set things straight between them. She'd taken the precaution of reserving a seat on the train because it meant a class of ticket that had only a few people in each carriage. Her head was pounding a little with all the anxiety and changes she needed to be kind to herself. Fleur could almost imagine her blood fizzing with excitement of her decision to go in search of Tom. People likely thought of her as a willful and independent, but the truth was that Fleur had never travelled further than Adelaide City from its port. The decision to hunt down Tom might appear determined, but it was not without the feeling of butterflies at leaving all she knew. Fleur understood that her certitude in most aspects of her life originated from its familiarity, routine, and even, yes, its humdrum. While each corpse was individual and she treated them thus, humans were packaged in the same flesh that clung to a reliable skeleton that was projecting the same order of organs. Bodies worked in the same way, and only age or ill health or something more sinister changed their functionality. She knew her work and felt sure of her place within that structure. But this was an adventure in which there was no certainty, not even finding Tom. She assumed she returned to Farina as he told her he would, but she might discover that on a whim, and hurting from Irma's lies, he left the state. But Fleur wouldn't allow herself to consider that until it actually faced her. It might never come to it. So there was no point in getting herself into a lather. Hers was a long train among 11 others in various stages of departure or arrival that morning. Only one platform was empty in the Adelaide railway station, and that would be filled. The station concourse was a beehive of activity, humming with people moving in a constant flow in various directions as they began their busy day. But that was all minutes ago. Now she was feeling a little more secure, ready in her seat near her window and anxious to be on her way. The train seemed to mimic her state of mind. The engine that would haul them north to Terowie was like a snorting bull pawing the ground, straining and ready to charge. There were 8 seats in the compartment, and only 4 others were filled, leaving the seats directly opposite and next to her empty. She wished they would remain vacant, but finding a young man in uniform stepped down, looking at her sticker and smiling at her. "May I?" he asked politely. "Of course," she replied, crossing the legs at the ankles and tucking them neatly into the seat. He appeared younger than her, going by soft, clean-shaven skin. She watched him put his kit bag overhead before settling opposite her. There was 2 other couples within the compartment, older than both of them, and each reading either a book or newspaper. Once seated, the young man gave her a grin. "How far are you going?" "All the way to Farina," she replied. "Good grief, so am I," he said in a frown. "I thought I knew most people of Farina. You aren't familiar." "Did you grow up there?" "He not born in Adelaide, but my father and uncle took over the general store at Farina when I was only a few years old. Our family moved there, and I left not so long ago to join the RAAF. "Congratulations, your family must be proud," he shrugged. "I used to watch the old aeroplane landing in the desert nearby, often crash landing," he said with a chuckle, "and I dream of what it must be like to fly in those huge skies over the Flinders Ranges." Fleur smiled. "I know someone like you from Farina who used to daydream about what lay beyond the ranges. What's his name?" "Tom Catchler." It felt nice to say his name, but it also frightened her to speak, as though she were casting a spell over a happy outcome for her journey. She told no one where she was going or why. Appleby's, now hers, with no protest from Irma, would be closed for at least a week, perhaps longer. It felt thrilling, but at the same time reckless, and she knew she risked desperate disappointment at the end, but Tom was worth it. Her companion's big smile warmed her thoughts and banished her fears momentarily. "Tom. I know Tom. He was always nice to me. He used to encourage me in my dreams to join the RAAF. She nodded, feeling her throat clogged with emotion. "That sounds like him," she said. He sat forward and reached out her hand. "I'm John Napier Bell." Fleur shook it. "Fleur Appleby, so you're going home," she said, sounded pleased for him. "Yes, but only briefly. I've recently finished training in Victoria, and so we've all been given some time to visit our families, and then return to your base. Yes, although there's talk that some of us may go to England." She frowned. "Why's that?" She gave a light shrug. Dashing in his uniform, those buttons he had loosened for sitting. "There's talk of war with Germany." One of the other men looked up, and Fleur thought it was giving them a sour look for talking. "Oh, surely not," she said, sounding incredulous. "We're all only just getting back to normal after the last war." But even as she said it, she recalled how her father would shake his head at the breakfast table, reading his paper, and remark that a new challenger in Germany had big plans. Bell nodded. He didn't look at all bothered at the notion of war, with all the youthful energy that his age had in vast reserve. "Seems unthinkable, I agree, but this Hitler bloke who is on the rise in Germany shows us a lot of hostility in his nature. He fought in the Great War and feels the soldiers were betrayed." "Oh, I don't want to think about this," she said, feeling her belly clench. "Sorry," he grinned, "but if it comes to it, I want to be in the skies over Europe with whichever squadron I belong to." "Gosh, so brave," she said with an easy but affectionate smile. "A shrill whistle in the distance demanded attention. Sounds like we're about to get going." He changed the subject. "Is this your first visit to Farina?" "I'm afraid so. I have no idea what to expect. All those lovely polished brogues will have to be put away. You've chosen the right time of year to visit, because it's not sweltering, but if it's been dry, the dust will clog the lovely pinprick patterns on your shoes, and if it's rain, then it's going to be muddy. Oh, she said, looking crestfallen. She wanted to look perfect for Tom. Lucky I have others then, he nodded. Save those for church. The whistle sounded again and doors banged down the train. Here we go, he said, grinning again from his long square jaw. His thick hair, which clearly wanted to be unruly, was cut short at the sides and neatly parted on the left. The bull was finally allowed to charge in a bellowing rage of steam and smoke, hauled its carriages out of Adelaide Central Station and headed through the suburbs until they left the final one, Kilburn, behind and hit the small open farmland of Salisbury. We're headed for Gawler, John helpfully offered, and then we'll start the small climb up the Roseworthy bank. You'll know when we reach that because you'll hear the train strain and complain. He won a grin from her, and you'll know we've reached Hamley Bridge because we'll make quite a clatter going over it. What time is the next stop? Nothing precise about this train, Fleur, I must warn you, but it's now what? He glanced at his wristwatch, just reaching 9:15, so we'll be at the Traree for noon or thereabouts. What happens then? We change trains and go to Peterborough, he said, settling into his chair. Until then, forgive me if I catch 40 winks, will you? I have been travelling for a couple of days. Please rest, she said, smiling. She was happy to let the scenery pass slowly by and give her a chance to let her racing pulse find a quieter rhythm. Please be there, Tom, she cast out into the world beyond Gawler, the last glimpse of humanity before Mother Nature had them fully in her clutch. They changed carriage at Taree and continued their journey. Fleur's companion, still nearby and just dozing now, John stirred as the train slowed into Peterborough. Fleur was astonished that his body just seemed to know where they were. He blinked and yawned, and as he stood, he had no need to stretch or worry about stiff-limbed. His was too young and strong. He didn't wait for her to ask, but lifted her small hand, hold all, and politely handed it to her. Thank you, Mr. John. Do you mind if I stick with you? She hoped it didn't sound too forward or like an invitation. Not at all. I'm sure this feels rather strange for you. As she stood on one of the two station platforms and regarded the sudden mass exodus, she frowned. Does everyone alight here? He nodded. Yes, it's from here that people make their connections to the far west to Perth, or to the far north to Alice Springs, or to Farina and beyond, she finished, sounding awed. I love that. We're all together for a while and then we bundle off and go to all corners. Train travel is brilliant, but wait until you fly, Fleur, she laughed. I can't imagine that will happen. Oh, it will. One day you will take a flight across our great nation and visit friends in Queensland or Darwin or London, he said, with wide eyes and an excited expression. I'll trust that if you're the pilot, John. How about a pot of tea while we wait? I'm starving. Come on, the refreshments are on me. You've been most gallant. As they each drank a cup of tea, they shared some sandwiches and a wedge of cake. It was about half an hour while all the luggage was unloaded and then reloaded into their train, while John pointed out, we're lucky. We get a good connection. That's a T-class engine, and we now move to narrow gauge. So it's a smaller train. Life's about to get rutty, he warned. I know that's not a word, he added with a smile. Maybe not, but I understand exactly what I've been warned about, she said. You eat the rest, she urged, and he did like any 20-year-old with a bottomless stomach would. It's quite flat here. It's quite flat from here to Ororo, but then you hear our engine struggle through the higher country before we drop into Hammond and onto Corn. Normally Fleur might have tuned out to this sort of conversation, but the truth was that she rather enjoyed listening to John making polite chit-chat. If she remained engaged, it prevented her from allowing her mind to drift to Tom and whether they still had a future.